optics, and we cover everything from IOL calcs to basic optics. But what I hope this morning is that by the time we get done, we're going to go for about 2 hours. In the last 15 minutes, I hang around, answer questions. But my goal is to give you an understanding of IOL calculations practically, so that when you leave today and you go back to your practice, you can improve your outcomes. That's the goal. So I want you to have some hard facts. And I'm not going to say, you know, this is not a sales on holiday formulas, okay? Because I'm going to tell you exactly what the differences are and which ones are best. We wrote an article, Ron Nellis, and all of that. So we're going to try to give you pearls today that will help you give better outcomes to your patients in terms of the predictability of IOLs. Here are the people that I am consulting with currently, none of which really have any relevance to what we're going to talk about, but if they do, I'll mention it during the lecture. And the Academy, I turn in a handout, but I keep those updated on my website at Doc Holiday. And under Doc Holiday, I have a list of all the handouts of things that I've given. That's docholiday.com. And those handouts, basically, all of them from the Academy and Astros and the Royal Hawaiian Islands, the 3 meetings I go to in a year. And you're welcome to download any of them. And the one that we're talking about today is number 8, which is advanced IOL calculations. So, docholiday.com, you go up, you go to the Doc Holiday tab, and underneath that it's got publications that you can download. It's got handouts so that you can take these home and see exactly the slides that we're going to show this morning. Okay, now, the Vergence Formula. There's a lot of discussion about Vergence formulas and artificial intelligence, Snell's law, and I'd like to talk about that a little bit. Now, the theoretical formula, Vergence Formula, was developed by Gauss about 173 years ago, so it's not anything new. And that Vergence Formula, what it does is this is it. It's the relationship of what an IOL power needs to be if you know the length of the system, the axial length, the effective lens position, the target refraction at a given vertex, the K reading, and the ELP again. Now this is the formula. That formula is, as I said, 175 years old. And so it's nothing in terms of rocket science, okay? Now, that formula that Gauss came up with is the approximation of what you get with Snell's law, okay? But if you use Snell's law, and we know the front surface radii and the back surface radii, or topography really is what you have to know, and we do the radii of the intraocular lenses in the front and back surface, which are proprietary. But if you do all that, Snell's law, ray trace, would give you the same exact answer as the Vergence formula for what's called the paraxial rays, which are the ones near the optical axis. So, for the Vergence formula is equal to Snell's law for the paraxial ray, the one that's right near the axis. Now, as you draw rays that go through that, go say 3 millimeters from that axis, well now if there's spherical aberration in that system where that ray actually bends a little in front of the paraxial ray, you don't get the same answer with Snell's law doing all the rays over that 3 millimeter pupil as you do for the paraxial one, which is along the optical axis. All right, so, so the theoretical Vergence formula, if you put the principal planes right and do everything you're supposed to, it gets exactly the same answer as Snell's law, and it's no better or no worse if you don't have the topography of the cornea and you don't have both radii of the intraocular lens. You get the same exact answer. All right? So all I'm saying is that Vergence formula is limited, however, by the accuracy of the K reading, the accuracy of the axial length, the accuracy of the effective lens position, and the accuracy of the refraction. And Sperker-Norby wrote an article on that and showed that when you look at those variables, tolerances on the measurement, the best you can do at that time was about 75% within plus or minus 70.75 diopters. We've gotten better primarily because the axial length is better and because we've automated keratometry. Now the standard is about 75 to 80% within plus or minus half a diopter. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about that. But anyway, the Vergence formula is this, okay? Now here's what artificial intelligence application would do. Let's say we had a right triangle. We're in the construction business. And we want to build this diagonal. And we measure the height, and we measure the base of that triangle. Now that diagonal is what old Pythagoras figured out several thousand years ago, whenever he did it, that the length of that diagonal is the square root of the sum of the squares. Now we're going to use that a little bit later when we talk about chord view also. So there's a reason for you to know Pythagorean theorem. But the point that I'm making is you can run all the artificial intelligence that you want, and you'll never find that the hypotenuse of a triangle is the square root of the sum of the squares. If you already know the equation, there's no reason for artificial intelligence to look for that, because the source of the error is the measurement of the size of the triangle. That's where the errors come, not the formula, the measurement. And that's what we're limited with today. The prediction of the ELP, it changes a tenth of a millimeter over the first 6 months. So even if you predict it at the third week, it's not going to be right for the 6th month. The K readings, we got back surface power. But we take a measurement with a 2.5 millimeter ring, and we need to get the whole power over a 4.5 millimeter zone. And a 3.2 millimeter sample is not always a very good measure of the whole zone. Axial length, we're doing a good job. That's down to about 100 microns. That's been the biggest improvement that we have. The prediction of the ELP has gotten better in the various formulas that have come along. But you will never, ever be able to get above 92% within plus or minus a half a diopter with the instruments we have today, because of the variation in the keratometer, the axial length, the ELP, the refraction, and actually the pupil size. So anybody that tells you they get we get 99%, is because they've eliminated the 8 to 10% of the cases that we call out of bounds. Well, what does that mean? It means that if it's out of bounds, just like you can do with screening, and we're going to talk about that this morning, that screening, I can tell you the patients are going to be outside plus or minus a half a diopter before you operate. And it's the same thing with artificial intelligence. It can recognize those patients are going to be out. So if you eliminate the outliers, you can get 97, 98%. But you can't do that. All formulas have to take all people, and if you take 10% away and get 90%, 99%, then when you add those back in, you get 90%. So don't be fooled by those types of intelligence that eliminate 10% of the cases, because that's not a fair comparison. All right, now, effective lens position. That's where the thin lens position of the IOL is. And that was first predicted by Benkhorst. And what Benkhorst said was, if an axial length is 10% longer than normal, and the average ACD is 4 millimeters, then the ACD, the ELP, is 10% larger. Okay, so he said, if it's 4, it's going to be 4.4 in a long eye. If it's 10% longer, so he used the axial length as a scaling factor. And that was our first time anybody specifically calculated the ELP for a specific patient. That was 1980. And then I looked at that stuff and I was wondering how they could compete with SRK, and the SRK come out with results that were good as Vergence did, when a straight line doesn't accurately represent what happens with axial length that's 1 over, and it should be a curve and a straight line. Well, it didn't, unless you optimize the constant for the linear regression and then used a value like 4 millimeters for the big course, so it didn't fit right in the middle, and it wasn't optimized, so the result was that you could show a linear regression was better if you used the optimized constant for the regression and used the one that was on the shelf for the theoretical. So I wrote an article in '86 showing that that was a problem and we ought to be using it, and if you optimize the constant for Vergence, you get a whole lot better result than you do with a straight line, because it's not straight. It's not a straight line, it's a curve. And then when I was looking at that, I looked back and I said, well, you know what? We not only have axial length, we have a K reading. And it seems to me the height of the dome and the position of the intraocular lens would not only be somewhat proportional to the length, but the steepness of that dome. If it's steeper, it ought to be deeper, and if it's shallower, it ought to be closer. So I came up with the Holiday 1 that was based on axial length and a model that did that, and sure enough, it was better than the Vergence, and that was in 1988. And it had 2 variables, axial length and K. And then there was a whole host of articles that after 1988, the SRKT, the Hoffer Q, that used those 2 variables and beta modification to do better and use the data set, and so we had a whole bunch of those, and they're still out there today. And then in 1995, Tom Olson, good friend, came out and said, you know what? ACD and lens thickness are important. So in 1995, he published his Olson 1, had 4 variables, and it was better than the Holiday 1. And I said, okay, Tom, I'm going to do even better. And I did it as a result of a study I did with Jim Gills. And Jim Gills had all these eyes down to 15 millimeters. And we were coming out with results all over the place. On some eyes, we make a 5 diopter hyperopic surprise, and other eyes that come out ametropic. They'd have the same axial length. And I said, gee, how can that be? Axial length's the same, decays are the same, what's going on here? Well, we came out with the Holiday 2, and then in 12, Olson modified his again, but what I got him to do, I got him to use more than 2 variables. Now they're using 5, 6, and 7, just like I was doing, and you can learn more about the anatomy of the eye. Well, one of the things that you need to do is that back surface. And the True K is one of the biggest advances in that, because Scheimpflug is not as accurate quite as front as Purkinje and reflected and topography images. So even though it got the back surface, it lost a little on the front, so the advantage wasn't that big a deal. But when you look at that, these are the 7 variables, and it got down to the one that they disagreed about was the white to white. We still argue about that today. It's on the instruments, it's automatically imported on the LensStar and the IOL Master and the IOL Consultant today. And the measurements are about 12 millimeters. Here are the other measurements that we got that are averages from the study, but the white to white gives you an estimate of the angle softness of the bag, but they're not accurate because the white to white varies a lot. But here's what the discovery that was so important that gets lost in studies today that compares it to the Holiday 2. And it's simply this. What we found was, and this was with Jim Gills, that big course observation that it was proportional to axial length was wrong 80% of the time. In short eyes, only 20% of the eyes get proportionally small and have a small anterior segment. Okay? What happens is 80% of the eyes that are down to 15 millimeters have a normal anterior segment. Now, why is that? It's because the anterior segment and posterior segment are far enough on the genome that they're not correlated. And what happens is 80% of the people that have short eyes are axial hyperopes, not nanophthalmic. That's the reason. So it splits. It splits so that with the same axial length, you've got 80% of the eyes with a deep anterior chamber, a normal anterior chamber, and only 20% that have a small anterior chamber. And what was happening is the one with the small anterior chamber, where the lens ended up closer to the cornea, those people would come out myopic because the lens was further forward. And at the same time, if we got those emmetropic, then these guys up here with the normal anterior segment ended up with that lens much deeper in the eye, much farther behind the cornea, lost effective power, and would come out hyperopic. So it has to split, and that's what the Holiday 2 did, and the measurement that you can't fool is the white to white. The nanophthalmic eye will have a white to white down about 9 or less. The normal eye will have one about 11.5 or 12. So the thing that happens is people will take 500 eyes, run an IOL calculation with the Holiday 2, and in those 1,000 eyes, less than 100 will have an axial length less than 20 millimeters, and only about 75 will be down around really short where it's nanophthalmic or normal. So it doesn't show up in a normal study when you look at anything other than short eyes. And then every little study that shows where it compares the Holiday 2 with short eyes, where it looks at short eyes by itself, comes out better. And that's because it goes down 2 paths and splits those eyes between nanophthalmic and axial hyperopes. Okay? So that's the reason why the 2 is better in short eyes. Now, in long eyes, we found a similar relationship where only 10% of the eyes have a unusually large 14 millimeter white to white, and 90% of them have a normal anterior segment. So once again, the reason for the high myopia was axial. It was axial myopia, not boophthalmos, where you get this proportionately large eye. See? So once again, it splits. But the split is even more significant where you've only got 10%. But this was done about the year 2000, late 90s, okay? And was done with immersion A scan. And immersion A scan is what all this was developing. Okay, then 2000, the IOL Master started coming along. And Barrett and Olson didn't start their formulas until after IOL Master was out. And so all theirs was on optical biometry. Okay, well, Wolfgang Heiges, when he helped develop the IOL Master with Zeiss, had over about 1,500 eyes that he had immersion A scan and had optical biometry on. And he came up and developed a linear regression so that the measurement on the average was identical to immersion A scan, that linear regression. But the longest eye he had was 26 millimeters long. So what do you think he did for 26 to 34? Extrapolated that straight line. Well, that turned out to be wrong. And Doug Hope, Lee Wang, went back about 5-6 years ago, came up with the WK long eye adjustment for the Holiday 1, Holiday 2, they didn't have it in there, Hoffer Q, SRKT, and the Heiges. okay? Because those formulas had all been developed on a version A scan, and that linear regression that Huygens had used was wrong, so he came back and adjusted that with the linear regression was right, and it turns out that when you measure 36 millimeters on optical biometry, it's really 34, because he extrapolated with the straight line. So the Holiday 2 is wrong as the Holiday 1 on long eyes with optical biometry, because it employs Wolfgang's mistake with the regression. So 4 years ago, 5 years ago, I said, don't use it. Use the Wang-Koch long eye adjustment, because the Holiday 1 and Holiday 2 by themselves are wrong for long eyes, okay? Now, so it doesn't run along a diagonal, it runs more along that horizontal, and the anterior segment basically is normal in 80 to 90% of the eyes, as opposed to being proportional to the axial length. All right, now, so more measurements. As we said, today you should have 75% within plus or minus half an hour. Okay? And it was in the short eyes where we got the biggest benefit, in the long eyes, and the reason for the long eye errors were threefold. The other problem was with the version A scan, those people that had myopic staphylomas, it didn't measure to the macula, it measured to the posterior cone, so it got a number that was wrong. But anyway, today, you've got to use that Wang-Koch adjustment, or, and this is the one from Doug, 2011, so that was 8 years ago. And basically, what we've done, though, is, when Doug did this, it's a little, what he calls aggressive. It means you're going to come out myopic instead of hyperopic. So last year, Lee Wang and Doug published an edition where they looked at their regression and added the Holiday 2, and then I gave them the Holiday nonlinear regression. And that regression was based upon 20,000 eyes that I got from Nellis. I went back and looked at Doug's eyes, said, no, you're a little bit more myopic than you should be. So you certainly want to use either Wang-Koch or the Holiday nonlinear regression, but the Holiday nonlinear regression will be right on the button to get the same number of hyperopic surprises as myopic, whereas the Wang-Koch is a little on the myopic side, okay? So that regression basically is a result of the 20,000 eyes, and you see all these down here, WK, 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 this is from that Millis article in 2018, went from having hyperopic surprises in long eye to having myopic surprises in long eye. And you see Barrett and Olson, which were pretty close to zero, developed their formulas on the IOL master, so didn't have that long eye error, because it wasn't Wolfgang's original thing. Okay, so with Holiday regression, you come out right here as zero, whereas you come out myopic with either the 1 or the 2. When you, they didn't have the 2 to put their regression, so that's not the problem. But anyway, we modified it, so for the 1 and 2, it comes out right here, so that's what you should do if you do a long eye with that calculation. All right, and here it is. Here's the nonlinear regression, and that nonlinear regression, here's Koch in blue. And you see the nonlinear regression is about 60% between them. So it's less aggressive, is what I'm trying to say. Okay, and this is, so you see, down at 32 millimeters, it's about a millimeter shorter than the measurement would indicate. Okay. And we've implemented this in our software a long time ago, so it's all there. All right, and this just again shows that the nonlinear regression is one of the reasons why you have to modify that. And actually, Zeiss is going to put that on their IOL Master 700, and when they do that, they're going to drop the 1 and the 2 without that, because there's no reason to leave it alone. They don't do. All right, so now, one thing that you should know about refractive lenses, all right, is that there's a measurement on both the IOL Master and LensStar. Now, I've changed this to 0.6. I should have changed it in this slide. The average distance is about 0.33 millimeters from the visual axis to the center of the pupil. And when it's greater than 0.6, diffractive lenses don't perform well because the diffractive lens wants to be on the visual axis and centered on the pupil. And you can't do both of those for anybody that's got a cord view or angle cap. Daniel Chang and George Waring renamed this distance cord mu because angle kappa, to measure that, you're supposed to go back over with a pen light and get normal to the cornea where you're centered on the pupil and measure the angle between. Well, the only instrument that does that is the synoptical. How many of you have one of those? You have a synoptical? Wow. Wow, cool. I've never asked that question and never got anybody to raise their hand. 2 people. Oh,
Question.
No. Anyway.
So you're saying greater than 6 is a problem, so 7. My own master measures in 1, 2, 3, 4,
Right.
0.1. So
Maybe.
7 bad, 6 good. Okay.
That's right. And it actually measures in 2 decimal points. It's got 0.67. I'm going to show you an example.
Oh, okay. Mine is.
It's got, anyway, 0.6. And these 2 articles show that. And the best place to put the IOL under 0.6 is halfway between the visual act, the light reflex, and the center of the pupil. Okay? So if you nudge it over to the center of the pupil, you ought to nudge it just a little bit farther, about 150 microns to be just right, because the visual axis is where tilt and decentration counts operate. All right, now here they are. This is the LensStar, and you see on the LensStar, they call it PCX and PCY, pupil center X and Y. Now that's why I'm saying you need to know the Pythagorean theorem, because it's the chord of that hypotenuse that counts, not just the X or the Y. Now, it turns out that if you just add the absolute values together, you're still going to be pretty close. So you don't have to walk all the way to the calculator. But it's going to be a little bit less than the sum of these 2. So you see this is 0.56 and 0.41 is the sum. You don't look at the signs. You don't cancel out a plus and a minus like this. All right? You don't cancel, you don't care about the sign. All right, here it is on the IOL Master. You're right, look at that. I never noticed that. PX and PY are just to a 10. Okay, but they round it off. So this guy would be right on the fence, 0.6 of a millimeter. Well, if you do the sum of the squares, that comes out about 0.55. So he just passes. But the point is, the longer that is, the poorer the performance of the diffractive lens, because it wants the edgelets of the rings on the lens concentric with the pupil, because this side at 3 o'clock cancels out that side at 9 o'clock to get that constructive and destructive interference. And if you cut off one side or the other, then it doesn't have anything to get that constructive interference out, because you no longer have waves coming from the side that's covered. Okay? Now, at the same time, it wants that chief ray coming down the barrel to go through the center of the lens. So it wants to be on the visual axis and centered on the aperture. And so you halfway between is the optimal value. Yes, sir?
Why does it matter that it's the longer end rather than just the X and the Y separately? Why do you have to use the hypotenuse?
Well, that's a good point, because that lens should be halfway between the visual axis and the center of the pupil, and if that's a diagonal, it should be right here. You don't just displace it temporarily or nasally. You should displace that to where you're halfway between the center of the pupil and the light reflex.
Talking about the 0.6 cutoff, I would definitely nudge it towards the
Well,
0.2.
that's what I'm saying, that from the pupil center to the visual axis is a diagonal, okay? And when that distance is more than 0.6 of a millimeter,
Oh, I see.
even when you put the lens in the same, you're 0.3 of a millimeter from both of those values. See what I mean?
Yes.
So it's the diagonal that counts, not one or the other. Yes, sir?
So if I look at this one, I see that the Q-axis is positive in one and negative in the other.
And I said, ignore the
So
sign.
that's what I'm going to challenge you on. So when you nudge the lens though at the end, do you nudge one of them up a little bit and or nasally and the other one not?
Well, yeah, okay, so here's the point, and I've argued with them a million times about putting a sign on that, because here's what happens. In geometry and in math, the x-axis is always negative on the left and positive on the right, okay? And I said, but the y-axis is always positive above and negative below, okay? So the y-axis is okay, because what that means is that I use the visual axis as the reference, and it means the pupil, when it's negative, the value is the center of the pupil's below the visual axis, and if it's positive, it's above, okay? But on the x-axis, if you have negative, well, negative, okay, so let's take a right eye, my right eye. Okay, the light reflex is nasal, so the center of the pupil is going to be temporal, right? And it's relative to the visual axis. So in my right eye, since it's temporal, it's going to be a negative value because x is negative on the left side. But in the right eye, it's going to be a positive value because it's flipped, it's a mirror image. So what happens is you ignore that because the fact that x is always on the left is wrong because it makes the right and left eye not equal when they're both nasal. That's all it means. So that's why I'm saying ignore that sign, because they're using geometry because they're engineers. They're not clinicians. And we say, gee, the light reflex is nasal in both eyes. And the problem is nasal in both eyes is the opposite side. Okay? All right, but anyway, here are the values on the IOL master. They're still the same values. And basically, that's what you want to do. And here's another example. The 700 has it also, and again, it's to 1/10 of a millimeter, so this would be somebody that's close. All right. And so, yes.
So you're saying pretty much the visual axis is always going to be nasal.
Say what?
The visual axis is always going to be nasal to the center of the pupil, pretty much. That's what
Yes.
you're ignoring the.
Yes,
the
that's right.
Okay.
And the reason for that, yes, is the answer to that. Now remember, we're going to the center of the pupil. The eye is actually tilted out about 5 degrees, so that's almost 0.6 of a millimeter on the average. But we don't care about that. It just means when you try to center a lens, you're actually moving it over 0.6 of a millimeter to get to that visual axis, because the actual distance is 0.6 of a millimeter from the optical center of the bag. Okay? And the pupil is about halfway between the center of the bag and the visual axis. That's why it's only 0.3 of a millimeter difference. But still, when you're moving that lens over, the two optical factors are the pupil and the visual axis. So that's what you want to be halfway between. All right, again, that's the best centration, and that's it. Now, data screening, okay? Remember I told you that if you identify outliers preoperatively, then you can reduce your prediction error, and if you do some more things to prove that those outliers measurements are correct. All right, and here are the things that I tell you to put up by your biometer for your technicians. These 5 things will identify those 25% of the patients that are going to have a refractive surprise more than a half an hour. Okay? So if you look at these, the binocular is the one that's, I get these all the time. Dr. Holiday, Patient their whole adult life had the same prescription in each eye. It's impossible to have, when that's the case, those first three measurements to exceed those values. You can't have an axial length more than 3/10 of a diopter, millimeter. You can't have a K difference more than 1 diopter, and you can't have an IOL power more than 1 diopter difference in an adult whose refraction was equal in both eyes his whole life. It's not possible. Something's wrong. So you got to go back and double check those measurements and find out where it is. Now, if you find out that the axial lengths are 4/10 of a millimeter difference, it exceeds that value, and the K reading turns out to be different, and the IOL power is the same, okay, I'll buy that. But I won't buy that the IOL power has to be 1 diopter difference if he's had the same glasses his whole life. Because their crystalline lenses are equal, 99% of the time. Now the other two are a little more tricky. Signal to noise ratio is on there for axial length, and it should be greater than 2, okay? The signal to noise should be greater than 2 for the axial length, okay? But it's got a standard deviation too. But in posterior subcapsular and nuclear sclerotic eyes, the optical path that the instrument uses goes around that cataract and comes back, and then it ends up interfering, and the path that it measures is longer than the true optical length. So dense posterior subcapsulars and nuclear sclerotic can have standard deviations that are consistent, but the signal to noise ratio will be real low because it's going around us. But beware that you'll measure longer lengths in dense PSCs and nuclear sclerotic cataract. Now, this last one here, that standard deviation, on both the IOL Master, the LensStar, every instrument you have has a standard deviation for the K readings, and it does more than 1. It does usually 3. If that standard deviation is more than 0.03 millimeters or 30 microns, they don't give it to you in diopters. They're engineers. But 30 microns or 0.03 millimeters is equal to 0.2 diopters. Okay? So when you see, I thought I had an example of that. So these are the values though. Okay, 0.03 millimeters or 30 microns, and they'll have that right next to the K reading. And at that value, you need to walk that patient over to the topographer because they have irregular astigmatism. Now, half of those people will have dry eye. The other half will have an irregular astigmatism, keratoconus, corneal scar, irregular astigmatism. And a topography measurement is far better with 14,000 points to estimate that 4.5 millimeter zone than a 2.5 millimeter ring, or 2 millimeter, okay? So the standard deviation allows you to identify that patient with irregular astigmatism with dry eye, walk them down another path that gets more measurements, treat the dry eye, and do all the things you need to do, but you've identified that patient pre-operatively. All right, now, cataract surgery following refractive surgery. Now, the ASCRS website is very beneficial, okay? And it's got a lot of stuff on there. It's got the Hygus-L, it's got Sam Maskett's thing, but all of those are basically ways of adjusting the K reading to where it's proper. The axial length measurements are okay. The ELP is still a pretty good prediction, except that the K reading is no longer an accurate indication of the size of the eye because it's been modified by the refractive surgery. That's the problem. The ELP predictions go away and the keratometry becomes less accurate. And that's why we have problems. So, it's always interesting to me, when I do rounds with the residents, I'll look in with a direct ophthalmoscope and I can see the distortions that are created by the optical system. And if I move a little bit one way or the other, if they move, I know they're in the cornea, and if they stay still, they're in the crystalline lens. And so like this guy right here, look at that reflex. You can see a dark spot there, you see this arctic transition and outside around. When I look at the picture, there it is, just like that. You see this dark background, you see that transition. That picture is basically identical. And you, with a little movement, I can predict the topography and what the wavefront's going to show before they ever let me see those by just looking in with a direct ophthalmoscope. All right, now, this is a little decision tree, but we've already been through that. Now, here's one thing I tell people about no drops. If you put artificial tears, BSS, anything in the eye, when that patient comes in for his topography, you've lost that standard deviation ability to detect those patients that have a problem. And the measurement you get, when you put a drop of saline in the eye, the K reading gets a half a diopter steeper. Okay, any of you that have ever looked in the mirror, when you put an eye drop and look and you say, gee, that looks clear. It's because you gained a half a diopter of power and it lets you see closer because your cornea swells. The epithelium swells as soon as you put that drop in. It gets steeper and all of a sudden you're half a diopter stronger. So those measurements are bogus. What you do is you tell that patient to blink, okay? Blink, 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 okay? And then stare. Boom, and you've got to hit that button within 1 second. You can't say, okay, keep looking right there. Don't blink, don't blink. You can't do that. You cannot go more than 1 second before you hit the button after they blink frequently. And that's the best way to get the measurements, okay? And all this diagram is saying, okay, you get the keratometry and it's over 0.03 millimeters. Some of those will have dry eye and you treat it. Those that don't have an irregular astigmatism, PMD, keratoconus. You get topography on those, and you get tomography on the ones that have had refractive surgery. And then we'll talk about the IOL calculators. But basically, H2, Olsen, and Barrett that all use a lot of variables will predict those best. And we'll talk a little bit about that. All right, now let's talk about keratometry. In the late 90s, we changed all the lens constants by 0.3 of a diopter, and yet I told you that Wolfgang calibrated the IOL master to get the exact same axial length as immersion A scan. Well, why did the A constants change? Because they changed the keratometer. But when we were using immersion A scan, we did manual keratometry and measured a 3.2 millimeter 2 points for a 44 diopter cornea. And when the IOL master came along, we measured a 2.5 millimeter and measured 6 points. And with the lens star, we measured an average 2 millimeter radius with 24 points. Okay, well, guess what? Okay, now what happens is when you measure a cornea at 3.2 millimeters that is 44, at 2.5 millimeters is 44.3. The reason that all the A constants went up by 0.3 of a diopter with optical biometry is because the IOL master reduced the keratometric diameter from 3.2 to 2.5. And that makes you measure 0.3 of a diopter higher power. So they calibrated the A scan to get the same, but they didn't calibrate the keratometer to get the same. Now, Hogstrite came along and measured 2 millimeters, but they weren't going to make the same mistake. So they calibrated their keratometer, which should measure another 0.2 of a diopter more, and back that back down by 0.2 of a diopter, so they got exactly the same thing as the IOL master is, and we didn't have to change our constants. Okay? But if the asphericity of the cornea is not average, then that adjustment's not correct. See, that's the average for 100 patients. But if you've got a steeper asphericity, you're going to get a higher measurement on the Hogstrite than you get on the IOL master than you get on the manual keratometer, because you're not average, okay? And if you have a less asphericity, they're going to be the other way. So the point is that I'm making there is that those three instruments are not identical by any means. And that's the reason why you have to personalize your ACOS, because you have to get measurements that on your system are consistent. And it's not good to mix an IOL master and a lens star, because they're different than each other in terms of the optical zone. Axial lengths are the same, but the keratometry is not. So somebody will call me up and say, Jack, look, I had to go over to immersion A scan to do my measurement for axial length because the cataract was so dense I couldn't measure it. And I'm wondering, should I drop down and use an A constant for ultrasound? And I'll say, well, no. If you still took your K reading with your optical biometer, then you want to use the A constant that was on the optical biometer because immersion A scan is the same. Okay? But if you went over and took it with manual keratometry, then the answer is yes. Okay? Test for dry, that's standard deviation, P less than 30 microns, and that's it. And here is the measurement. This is what I'm talking about. Right up here. This is the IOL master. And you see that right there? 0.0? That's what it is 90% of the time. So 0.03 is a little big, but it'll be 0. But tell your technicians to look at that number. Okay? Here it is on the lens star. They give it in microns, but 30 microns is 0.03 millimeters. And so this number should be less than 30. Okay? And that number is right there. And the one you want to use is the average, this R up here, the 6 micron, not either one. Okay? That's the one we're looking at. Okay, another thing that when you're doing, yes, sir?
Oh, sorry. Your hub strike keratometer, does that make it 2.2 as does the old?
2.2 and 1.7, it takes the average.
Not the electric one, the old, the manual one?
Oh, it's 3.2.
They're both 2.2, that, the old Boston keratometer, they're both 2.2?
I don't know. I don't know the B&L keratometer. I don't know, but I would, most of them are about 2.5, but they're certainly not down to 2. 2 is the smallest.
The old manual one. You get
Oh,
the old manual strike keratometer?
yes, those are 3.2.
Okay.
Cabal, the one from AO, all of B&L, yes, all of those are 3.2. Yes, sir.
So the IOL master and the immersion ultrasound axial lengths are normalized to each other?
Yes.
So you don't, because it doesn't one take the measurement to the further into the retina than the other?
That's right.
But that's fixed.
That's been adjusted out.
Okay.
In other words, what happens is, and that's a good point, that with optical biometry, the measurement goes to Brooks membrane and measures the retinal thickness. And so in order to get immersion A scan and optical biometry to be the same, you have to get a 200 micron or 0.2 millimeter average added to immersion to get those two to correspond. Or subtracted from optical biometry, which is what Wolfgang did to make the average come out
You
the
don't
same.
think about that, it's fixed.
Right. So, but here's what happens. If you end up with a 300 micron retinal thickness, okay? Well, then what happens is when it subtracts that 200, you still get the benefit of that 100 micron extra measurement that you wouldn't get with ultrasound. So it adjusts, it's like true Ks. It won't change it on a population of 100 people. But on an individual patient, it will adjust for the difference in the normal from what the normal retinal thickness is and what the normal K reading would be. Okay? Now, broken lines on a topography. You got that 30 microns that exceeded that value. You walk them over to the topographer and you look at those semi-meridians, and what do you see? Broken lines. If that patient has dry eye, you treat it, but if it doesn't go away, that irregular astigmatism, you're never going to get a toric lens on the button because they don't have a constant astigmatism for a 3, a 5, and a 7 millimeter zone. So your ability to hit that on the button is not going to be good. So look for those broken diagonals on your topography. Okay, and most of the time it's going to be the dry eye. Okay, now. All right, now let's look at a couple of them. Okay. It's never a perfect bow tie, no matter what. On the left is an asymmetric bow tie, on the right, it's curled together a little bit. And it just means that when you're doing, well, again, it's the same thing. If that standard deviation is over 30 microns, go to the control and use the 4.5 millimeter zone. The average pupil size of a person in a refracting lane that's 72 years old is 4.5 millimeters. That's the lenticle that counts, okay? And that's what this shows. That lenticle right here is the only thing that determines that macular image. The light ray coming from over here that's oblique that forms over there, you don't care. By the time you get 1 degree off of the foveola, the vision is 2200, and by the time you get 10 degrees off, it's count fingers. Refraction doesn't matter out there. It only matters for that foveola, okay? And the foveola is the projection of the real pupil onto the cornea. That's called the interest pupil, and the average value is 4.5 millimeters. Okay, that's the value that you care about. So you want to get the average astigmatism and power of the cornea over the 4.5 millimeter zone on people with irregular astigmatism. Okay? Now, that 4.5 millimeter lenticle, keratometry measures a 2, 2.5, or 3.2 millimeter ring with 4, 6, or 28 points. That's not enough if you've got irregular astigmatism. Topography measures 14,000 points on the front surface, and tomography measures 40,000 points on the front and the back. Now, Scheimpflug, which is tomography, doesn't measure quite as accurately as placido disc on the front surface, but when you take into account that it measures the back surface, gives you an improvement, so the two kind of come out about the same because you get back surface information, okay? Now, the True K gets placido disc, but only measures 6 points. So that's not like doing front surface topography. It's like doing keratometry on the front surface. So yeah, we get front, but it works on people whose standard deviation is less than 30 microns and are normal populations that have no distortion or irregular astigmatism. You're still better off using tomography or topography to get the measurements on those people with irregular astigmatism, which is your post-refractive surgery patient. All right? So when you look at your topographer, it'll have something down here that says zonal power, okay, which is what you want. What you don't want is SIM-K. SIM-K uses 4 points and simulates the keratometer. You never use SIM-K, or you might as well have stayed on the keratometer, okay? Zonal power is what you add, and every topographer out there will give you a power over a 4.5 millimeter zone. That's what you want. Okay, now, these methods, here's the 4-cut RK, and what I'm showing you here, when you're looking at these RKIs, and those people are coming through now because they were baby boomers for their cataract surgery, you could look at that and look at a nomogram and know that that guy was trying to hit -4. Now, you don't know that that was a refractive change, but you know what his target was. But here's an example of somebody that sees well, because they have very little distortion in the middle, but terrible out here. And here's somebody that sees terribly because the center is irregular, but has a pretty good ring out here. So you can get it all. The topography will tell you that. So, the 4 methods. Now, as I said, the Escris Web's guys got the highest LLOs, and you just put in the data and see what it is. And I would tell you that it's usually smart to run the multiple methods and use the one that predicts the highest lens power. Because you don't want to make a hyperopic surprise. Okay, so if you look at them all and you take the one that has the highest IOL power, that's probably going to be your best bet, because if they come out -50, -1, you don't care. They're happy because they got intermediate distance and stuff, but you don't want +1. All right, now, prior data method, this works, but there's 2 limitations. You got to know the pre-op cage, which you don't have, and you got to know what the refractive change is, which you don't have unless you're with the surgeon. So when it works in PRK and PRK and LASIK, because you don't get a drift over time like you do in RK. In RK, the historical method is worthless because they continue to get a hyperopic drift their whole life and they get against the rules. So it's not going to help you. But if you had PRK and LASIK and you had those Ks, then the historical method is a great check. Because all you do is say if you're 44 before surgery and they had a 4.5 diopter change, your Ks are 39.50. That's the historical method. Yes?
I had a patient recently, post-op day.
Yes.
Went to the highest reading, basically was the same pre and post-op.
At RK? Can't do it with RK. +1.
Plus 1.5.
That's right. And the reason that he came out +1 is because he continued to change. Well, and then the other problem is you never know how much nuclear sclerotic change is changing your refraction from the lens. If you know it's 6 weeks after surgery, you hadn't had a cataract yet, so that value's good, and it's stable in PRK and LASIK. In RK, the problem is that over time, over 10, 15 years, he has 2 things going on. That lenticular change in the lens and the fade in the cornea, and you don't know how much is lenticular and how much is cornea. That's the point. So you can't, it's common to come out hyperopic because what happened is the change that he had in the drift in that refraction, he had a diopter and a half of lenticular myopia compensating for that refractive change that you didn't pick up. That's exactly, and you can't estimate that. You can't estimate that. Now, one method that does a better job is to take the topographic zonal power today, in other words, get a topography, calculate the zonal power over a 4.5 millimeter zone, and subtract 15% of what you think the intended target of the refractive surgery is. So when we looked at that 6-cut RK, I know that's about -4, so I multiply -4 times 15, that's 0.6, and I flatten that K by another 0.6 of a dollar. Now, why do you have to do this? Because topography comes up with a pretty good front surface power, but what it doesn't do is tell you the back surface power, okay? And that back surface power doesn't change with PRK and LASIK, and it does change a little bit with RK. So in those cases, I found that tomography does a better job post-refractive surgery, and we have a thing like on the oculus that's called, on the Pedicam, the EKR65. And that EKR65 takes in the back surface power, looks at the distribution of power, and here's the thing people don't realize. It's like in keratoconus. We had a symposium yesterday at Zeiss, and I showed them, I said, no, if you have a patient with keratoconus, you cannot take the keratometric value for the K-reading. Because you've got a hot spot that's 48 diopters and a paracentral zone that's 44 diopters, and that's a bifocal cornea. If you ask that patient how he reads, he says, oh gosh, I can read great. I said, I can hold it right here and read. Because he's looking through the 48 diopter at near, and he's looking through the 44 diopter for distance. The paracentral power is what you use, so you take the mouse and you move around that paracentral zone, and 44 diopters is what you use, and he'll say this is great. But it's not what the keratometer measures, because it gets the average of 44 and 48, so it says 46, and the guy comes out +2. And he can't see up close or distance, because he's halfway between. So you take your mouse and you move around that paracentral zone, and that's the power you use in keratoconus. And what I'm saying is that in post-refractive surgery, the reason we use 65% of the power is because it becomes multifocal and the patient looks through the power that's best for distance, and that's what it does. So that EKR65 works pretty good in refractive surgery patients too. All right, Now, so, and then the last is the contact lens method. Now, the contact lens method is good, and most ophthalmologists are afraid to do that because it means you got to keep a trial lens set in the office and somebody that knows a little bit about contact. Okay? But you only end up needing about 6 lenses. And they're big lenses. You get 8mm lenses, base curves that you know what they are. You put a little power in them to help compensate for things. Because what happens is people that have RK and LASIK that have real flat corneas, the contact slides down and you're looking through the upper edge. And that's not a good thing. It has to center. And in order to center, you have to have a base curve that's close to what that peripheral power is so they can put it on there and set it off. If you do that, you can come up with exactly, because if I do this, if I'm, say, +2, all right, without anything on my eye, and you put a contact on my eye and I go to plane up, well, what I know is that that contact is 2 diopters stronger than my eye is. That's what that means. That's how I went from +2 to plane up. So that contact lens, if it's a 44 diopter base curve contact, then I know that my cornea is 2 diopters weaker, so it's 42. That is absolutely correct if you can get a lens on there to center. That's it. So the contact lens method works well, but you got to have about 6 lenses in there to be able to fit. All right, and as we said, you're going to get a hyperopic shift, a long-term hyperopic drift, and against the rule of astigmatism in a RK patient. So you just want to keep those in mind. If you're going to put in, well, it's simply because that's what's going to happen to them over time. And that posterior radius measurement with the pedicam is the and all I want to show you is that the back surface power, this is the study that I'm talking about. I did it with Warren Hill and Andrew Steinmuller 10 years ago. And it still came out that we could predict LASIK within 0.56, which means not 75%, but 68% were within that value. And in the RK patients, 68% within 1 diopter. And so what you tell patients are that because of the variability introduced by your refractive surgery, we may have to do a secondary procedure. And in most cases, that's going to be a PRK or a LASIK refractive surgery to fine tune. But you prepare for that because not one single study has ever shown that post-refractive surgery patients can achieve the accuracy that we can get in a virgin cornea. Because they're not equal. There's more variability. All right. Now, let's see here. Equivalent K. Well, we don't need to spend any time on that other than to show you this. Here's a normal patient. Look at the peak in that corneal power distribution. That's normal. All right. Here's a patient that's had LASIK. Okay? Again, look at that distribution. Now, here's a patient that's had RK. Look at that. And here's what I want to show you. All right, here's a patient with early keratoconus. Well, here's the point. Here's the normal, here's the LASIK, and here's the RK. 3 diopter range, 5 diopter range, 13 diopter range. And what I'm saying is the patient here doesn't look through that average power. He looks through this peak, this flat peak right here, because he's got a bifocal cornea. When we have bifocal intraocular lenses, you don't target for the average of the ad and the distance, you target the distance. And that's what I'm saying, that the bifocal intraocular lens is like a bifocal cornea. You target the distance with the lower power to come up with that, and then you start asking your keratoconus patients where they read, and they'll pull that in, and whatever the severity of the keratoconus, the greater the difference between the paracentral zone and the cap, and the closer they'll hold that reading material, and they'll read J1+. Okay? But it's not the average. It's a bifocal cornea, and it's very important for you to do that. All right, so keratoconus counts, and that's what I was about to show you. It's a bifocal cornea. You look at the power distribution. The EKR65 does that, but on your toe, you don't have to get a tomographer for that. You just take your mouse and have the technician or you move over that paracentral zone, all right, which will look like this. That's what I'm saying. His cone is up here, up at this range, up at, 49, 50 diopters, and he's looking through 45 for distance. So test that, and you can reassure yourself by proving that the patient holds material very close to read without any correction at 70 years of age, or whatever age your cataract is, and that'll reassure you that that paracentral power is the right one. Yes, sir?
On your software, there's a box to check for keratoconus. So I have a patient with 48 Ks.
No, but on the software.
On your software?
Yeah, well, but that checkbox, though, is so I don't size the eye based upon the keratometric reading.
Correct.
In other words, when I get up 48, well, that's not the same as an anophthalmic eye. So that keratoconus tells me not to use that K reading for the sizing of the eye. Now, if you were to go through and use a paracentral and put in a paracentral K reading, well, then you wouldn't check that box because that does size the eye properly.
So basically, if you have a 49 Ks and the eye was years ago 43, it's going to use 43 to determine the effective lens position and 48 for the power of the cornea, sort of like a hyperoptic LASIK.
Well, no. What I'm saying is, what I do is, when you tell me the patient's got keratoconus and check that value, then I use 44 to size the eye. I don't use whatever the K reading is on the front.
Okay.
If you go through and you actually use that paracentral value, well, then you're not fooling the system, so you don't check that box.
Right.
Because that 44 or 43 that you get paracentrally is the power that appropriately sizes that eye and it ignores that K, so you wouldn't check it in that case. All right, now, we can skip through this stuff. I'm just saying I've done a lot of keratoconus calculations and come out with the right answer because I use that paracentral power and show them how to do that on the tomography. Okay, now piggyback lenses. Spend a few minutes on that.
You have an
Piggyback
example of it?
lenses, you can't, it turns out that the piggyback lenses don't add together to give the same power as a single lens. So, if I calculated, for example, it comes up and says 40 diopters is the power that you need for a single lens. Well, two 20 diopter lenses will come out hyperopic. And the reason for that is here. All right? Now that looks like just a single lens in the eye. That looks like pretty normal. But you see that reflection of the iris there? There's multiple reflections. That's because that lens actually has 4 lenses in it. All right? And that was Jim. Jim Gills did that. For some reason they thought the more lenses you use, the greater the depth of field. And that's not true. It doesn't have anything to do with that. It has to do with how anterior the first lens is. Anterior chamber lenses have a bigger depth of field than posterior chamber lenses. And suture lenses have less depth of field than one in the back. So the further that lens is from the cornea, the less depth of field you have. Now, it's not intuitive, but that's the way it works. You just have to run a calculation.
What about interface between the two lenses?
Well, no. Yeah, the interface he's talking about, but here's what happened. My point here is that when you put a lens in the eye and you put multiple lenses in the back, it ends up that first lens is still in the normal position and every successive lens gets further back. So you lose effective power. They don't end up halfway, half in front and half behind. They end up all behind with that first lens at the same place. Now, You don't do that, because any soft foldable lens that goes in the eye, goes in the bag. Jim Gills, Johnny Gayton, every article shows that over time, at about the third year, it begins to compress the bag, and you get a flat spot in the center, and they go 3 to 5 diopters hyperopic. You never put 2 soft lenses in the bag, ever, because the bag will contract. Huh?
And one in the sulcus.
Yes, now, you can put one in the bag and one in the sulcus, which is what a lot of people do, and that works good, works fine. Because as the bag contracts, even if it's touching that front lens, it'll move a little bit, because they're not constrained by a bag that's compressing them. So, yeah, that'll work. And when you do that piggyback calculation, you always put the maximum power available in the bag, and then whatever you need in the sulcus to make up what that piggyback calculation shows. And it's basically a thick lens calculation that we do in the software, and there is no way, you can't do that in your head. But it turns out that if you use the maximum power in the bag and then whatever you need to go in the sulcus, that calculation is the most accurate, because you put most of the power in the one that's in the bag that you need anyway. And that's what we found is the most accurate. Now, the second part of that is, you should choose the power of the front lens to not be the lowest power that you can get that lens in. Okay, so what I'm saying is, let's say the one you're going to put in the sulcus goes from 10 to say 34 diopters. All right, and the calculation calls for a 30 diopter lens in the, a 10 diopter lens in the sulcus, and 34 in the back. Okay? You don't do that. Because if it comes out that that patient is myopic by a significant amount, well now, when you take that 10 diopter lens, you don't have any more lenses that are less than 10 diopters that you can exchange that with. All right? So what you do is, in that case, when it was 44 and 10, in our software, you can change that back power from 34 down to, say, 30 or 32. And then it'll rerun the calculation and say, okay, a 32 diopter lens in the bag and a 12 diopter lens in the sulcus. And that way, you've got 2 more steps below that if the patient were to have come out myopic by an amount that you don't like, you've got 2 more IOL sizes in there that you can go back in and use the same kind of lens to do that exchange with, okay? So never use, what that's saying is, never use the lowest power available in the front lens. Always change that one in the bag so you've got a couple of steps below that in case it doesn't come out right. All right, so don't put 2 in the bag. And this is the one where the holiday formula was developed on that too. These are the cases, because we had ophthalmic guys and we had axial hyperos. And that's where we figured out that it splits and goes into 2 different kinds of eyes. All right, toric calculations. Okay, now this is, we talked about true K, it's improving things. Now here's what happens, all right? We've already talked about, you gotta be better than 30 microns. We've already talked about, and we will talk about, exact toric calculators, surgically induced astigmatism, and we can get you to more than 80% within plus or minus a half diopter residual astigmatism. That's what we're going to do today. Okay, now, always choose the toricity that undercorrects corneal astigmatism. No. You always want to choose the toricity that minimizes the residual astigmatism. Okay? You want to leave that, and here's a concept. We'll talk more about that, but people think this. Well, this guy had against the rule of astigmatism. So if I have a choice there of leaving him with a half a diopter of against the rule and a quarter of a diopter of with the rule, I'm going to choose a half a diopter against the rule because that's what he's used to. Oh. Where that comes from is glasses, okay? If you were going to give a guy a pair of glasses, that's true. That if he's used to against the rule and you're going to put him in glasses and correct that, and he's used to against the rule, then you're right. The way the board tilts and the way things look. But the goal is to become spectacle independent. And if all he's got is a quarter of a half a diopter left, you're not going to put that in the glasses anyway. Okay? You're not going to use glasses for distance afterwards. And so the blur for a half a diopter of against the rule and a quarter of a diopter with the rule is twice as much with that against the rule. So you choose the one that gives you the least residual astigmatism. And we'll talk more about that. So it doesn't matter. Now there is one other factor. We all drift against the rule. So if you had a choice between a quarter with the rule and a quarter against the rule, then a quarter with the rule is a little better because you're going to drift a quarter diopter against the rule every decade from then on. And if you do that refraction at 1 month, you're going to drift a quarter diopter against the rule by the end of the first year because you will drift more right after the surgery. All right, now, there are calculators like the B&L calculator that use a constant toricity for a given amount of astigmatism. All right? So if you have 1 diopter corneal astigmatism, it says 1.5 diopter toricity is right, and that's right for a 10, a 20, or a 30 diopter lens. That's not right. The right way to do a lens calculation is to use the Vergence Formula. And you run it for the steep meridian, you run it for the flat meridian, and you calculate the difference in the IOL powers, and that's the ideal toricity. And what you find if you do that, for spheral equivalent powers that are high, you'll need less toricity than you will need for spheral equivalent powers that are low, like a 10 diopter lens. A 10 diopter lens needs 2 diopters of toricity to correct 1 diopter of corneal astigmatism. A 34 diopter lens needs 1 diopter of toricity to correct 1 diopter of corneal astigmatism. So you don't use a constant ratio, all right? Now, again, no astigmatism is perfect, so I'm saying topography is usually the best thing to use on those. And I want to show you a discovery we made this year. We published this in the Journal of Cataract and Refractive Surgery, and it was in the March issue, okay? Now, right now, if you're doing 75% within a half diopter, you're doing a good job. That's a good result. All right, and what we're going to do is if you'll do what I'm doing today, I can bump you up another 10%. Here's what we're talking about. Number one, you've got to use an exact Vergence calculator, not one with a constant. And number two, the surgically induced refractive change that you need to use is not what you've been doing. I'm going to show you why. All right. Constant ratio calculators, 2 diopters of astigmatism. It gets the same 3 diopters as the ideal toricity for a 10, a 22, and a 34. That's wrong. For 2 diopters of corneal astigmatism, it should be 3.5 for a 10 diopter lens and 2.4 for a 34. That's the right toricity. And it's just using the Vergence equation. Okay, and it's a little tougher than that's the way. And what I'm saying is, AMO has that. All right. AMO has that on their Express calculator. At DocHoliday.com, the Toric calculator we have, but Doc Holiday does that. Barrett's includes a Vergence calculation. The B&L is constant, so that doesn't work. The outcome that's available today is still constant and is supposed to change on October the 24th, and they will have a correct Vergence calculator. All right? Yes, sir.
Would you happen to know if Olson's, what's it called, figure optics, does it exact or constant?
I'm sorry?
Thomas Olson, figure optics.
Oh, no, Tom does a ray trace, so he has that too.
Okay, good, thank you.
Yeah, he does. Anything that Tom has a ray trace, so he's down here like the fairy. All right, now, here's what I'm saying. Alcon's making a change. Right here, you see, it's got the holiday calculation. I'll show you more about that. But it's got 2 radio buttons, okay? And until you see 2 radio buttons, if it's got a pull down, where it's got a pull down, that's the old calculator. Don't use that, because it's not right, okay? But that's supposed to be changed on the 24th. And then the other thing it's gonna have is this total SIA. You should check that box. If you're anywhere close to a temporal incision, and even if you operate above, it's going to give you a better value than you can get any other way. And I'll show you why. But check that box. But it's got to have the radio buttons, and I have that box, and that's supposed to happen on the 24th of this month. All right, now, and then at the Doc Holiday, our toric calculators had that on there forever, so it's got everything we're going to talk about. All right. Now here's what I want to show you about SIA. It's totally different. Now the first thing is, the delta K method was discovered by Stokes back in 1849. So that's 170 years old. And we took post-op Ks and pre-op Ks, took the difference and said that's what you need to add. We're going to talk about that. Well, in 2019, this is the way we've been doing it, that's 170 years. Your surgically induced astigmatism is the post-op minus the pre-op K. That's what we do. Now, these are the post-op minus the pre-op Ks on the double angle plot. Okay, now, right here, if we have 0.7 diopters, 0.75 diopters of width the rule, we get a delta K of right here 0.05 diopters against the rule. Okay, if you have width the rule. And these are taking delta K. If you have against the rule astigmatism of 0.72 diopters, you get about 0.1 diopters of width the rule. Now, how many of you today, when you're doing your calculators, put in a value near 0.1 diopter of width the rule for a temporal incision? Raise your hand if you do. Okay, give me some other numbers. What do the rest of you do?
0.2.
0.2? But most of you put in a 0.1 or 0.2 of width the rule, right? Okay, now, the reason that you do that is because in the cataract age group, you've got more against the rule than you have with the rule patients, so you end up with a point that's over here. That's why that 0.1 or 0.2 is there. Now let me show you this. Now, posterior corneal astigmatism was first reported by Doug Cole. And what he said is the average is 0.22 against the rule, but 5% of the patients have more than a half a diopter. That's what Doug's article showed. Okay? Now, in 2013, he had a parallelogram in which he said, okay, if you have, this was 2013, and what he said was, if you have with the rule astigmatism, add 0.6 of a diopter against the rule, which is another way of saying is take 0.6 of a diopter off of the magnitude of the astigmatism you measure, because it's in the opposite direction. Or another thing that he would say is drop down one step size on width rule. So if you said use a T4, drop down to a T3, and drop down one step size, and one step size is 0.75 diopters of toricity, which is about 0.5 to 0.6. So it's 0.6 against the rule. And he also said that if you have against the rule, right here, then what you do is you add 0.2 of a diopter. So if you have against the rule, leave it alone. use the lens power that it calculated, and you can actually add 2/10. So if it's close, you can add just a hair, but it's pretty close to not changing. But you add against the rule, okay? So you add against the rule to both of them, but it reduces with the rule, and it leaves the same or slight increases against the rule. And he said for oblique, don't do anything. Just leave it alone. Now, this year, Journal of Refractive, Cataract and Refractive Surgery, we published an article in the March issue in which we said, I'm going to ask you the question. Now that was using delta K. But if I had a half a diopter with the rule, preoperatively in the K reading, and I had a half a diopter against the rule in the refraction, not the K, but the refraction, all right? What was the total surgically induced change from the pre-op K to the refraction? 1 diopter against the rule. We went from a half a diopter of with the rule in the K to a half a diopter of against the rule in the refraction. Okay, so the next patient walks in the door, all right? Walks in with a half a diopter with the rule. I know that guy's going to come out a half a diopter against the rule, so I know that if I add 1 diopter against the rule to his K, it tells me what the refraction is going to be. So the formula that we used is the pre-op K plus the total surgical inducement is equal to the refractive astigmatism. So the total SIA, you take the post-operative refractions of your patient that got a spherical lens, minus the pre-op K, and it tells you what the astigmatism in the eye will be that needs to be corrected with the toric lens. And what does that include? All of these things. It includes any systematic differences between the keratometer and what the true refractive power is, the change in the front surface, the posterior corneal astigmatism, the change in the posterior corneal astigmatism, and guess what? The IOL contributes. The tilt of the IOL and decentration both induce against the rule. Okay? All of those things show up in the post-operative refraction. So that's why we call it total surgically induced astigmatism, because it includes everything that can possibly explain the post-operative refraction. So the new algorithm is to take the post-operative refraction from the pre-op K, not the K reading, because that K reading is only a part of the picture. It's only this part right here, the change in the anterior cornea, and even that's not very accurate because it's taken a 2.5 millimeter or a 2.0 millimeter sample. Now look what happened. So that's what I said, let's test this and see what happens. Okay, now with that total SI, I had the data from the 1 diopter toric lens from Alcon that didn't get approved because they used the Vergence calculator. And I went back and looked at that, and I took the post-operative refraction minus the pre-op K, and then I grouped patients together and I said, okay, I'm going to look at 90 degrees with the rule. 90-degree pre-operative astigmatism, and look plus or minus 10 degrees and take all those cases that were within plus or minus 10 degrees of 90 and calculate their total surgically induced astigmatism. And guess what happened? Well, the first thing I found was that the global centroid, that is the centroid of all these cases, was 0.27 diopters against the rule. And guess what that is? Doug Koch found 0.22 diopters as the average for posterior corneal astigmatism, and the tilt of a 22 diopter lens induces 0.05 diopters of against the rule, and the sum is 0.27. Right there. And then I looked at that 90-degree case that has 0.72 diopters of width of the rule, and guess what? That point was 0.68 diopters against the rule. Doug's recommendation 7 years earlier was 0.6 of a diopter for a width of the rule case. Within 0.07 of a diopter. And then, and he just did that empirically. And then we looked at the against the rule case with the same magnitude, and it came out 0.02 diopters with the rule, and Doug's recommendation was about 0.1. So we knew we were on the right track. But that's just the 2 points for 90 with and against the rule. What we found is when I grouped those together and looked at every degree from 0 around to 180, okay, I found that it made a circle. The diamonds are the real data, and the circle is the best fit. So that meant that I can take somebody with 0.72 diopters of with the rule astigmatism and know they're going to be 0.272 against the rule. That's the refraction that I'm going to need to correct with a toric IOL. But more importantly, because it formed a circle, I know that somebody that had 45 degrees, all right, and here again, here's our delta K, and here is the total SI. You see what we gain by looking at the refraction rather than the post-op K? The red are the delta Ks, and the green are the change in refraction. All right, so the point is they're a lot better. Now what does all this mean? It means this. Look at the guy that has 0.72 diopters at 45 degrees. Well, he's got this constant of 0.27, and he's got this vector that's about 0.3 aimed this way, and the total SIA is 0.42 at 152 degrees. It's not against the rule, it's not with the rule, it's oblique, and it's not even at the same axis as the pre-op K. It's oblique to that. And when you run that calculation, and you take 0.72 at 45 and 0.42 at 52, you end up with 0.44 diopters at 29 degrees. That's what you want to correct. The point of this is that even though his steep axis was at 45 degrees, that lens should go at 29 from all those factors that are going to contribute to the change that gets his final refraction. That lens is not supposed to go at 45 degrees. It's supposed to go at 29 because that total SI says, there's your residual astigmatism. 29 degrees, not 45. So it's 16 degrees. Now 45 degrees is the biggest difference. As you get to 90 and 180, they come out along the same axis as 90 and 180. But at 45 and 135, they're totally different than the original axis, and they get closer the more you go with it against the rule. So, here's the results. Look at this. This is using total SIA, and what it does is it shows a 30% improvement over what you get with Merit, which is the most common calculator today. But it did one more thing. It allowed you to get a 1 diopter lens improvement. They went back, used the 1 diopter lens data, ran it with the total astigmatism calculator, showed a significant difference and much better, but the FDA said, well, we're not going to let you develop a calculator retrospectively and do that, so you still have to go and do a prospective study. So they're right in the middle of that right now, and by the second quarter, they'll have that 1 diopter.
That'll be the T2?
Huh?
That'll be a T2?
That'll be a T2.
That's
right.
nice.
And that T2, they already started running it. They did a trial in Europe, and it proved that it was effective. And so then after that, it's been a 5-year project. But then once they proved that it worked prospectively in Europe, they proved that it worked retrospectively on the data that they had, well then they said, okay, we're bringing that into the US, and we're going to add that calculator to the website on October the 24th. Okay, so what are we saying here? Why is it better? Because what we want to know is what the refraction is with the spherical lens after surgery, and take that difference from a pre-op K. What the K reading is just one of those 6 parameters. So what it does is the total SIA takes all factors into account. Posterior corneal astigmatism, the change in the posterior cornea. If you think about that, when you do a cataract, you go in, you go up, and then you go into the eye. Well, that diameter of the posterior incision is much smaller optical zone than the outer incision, and it has a bigger against the rule effect. But you know what the biggest factor is? You make a temporal, you make a superior incision. Those two weaken the structural integrity of the eye. They make that eye compliant. And guess what the biggest factor is? The upper lid. The upper lid is what makes us go a half-quarter of a diopter against the rule every decade. After surgery, because the eye is more compliant, it accelerates that change for about a year. And the reason it makes a circle is because it's easier to flatten a steep vertical cornea than it is a flat vertical cornea. In other words, if it's steep vertically and flat horizontally, it's easier to flatten that than if it's flat vertically and steep horizontally, it's hard to flatten it. And that's the reason it comes out like that. And then everything else between horizontal and vertical is vectoral analysis, which comes out that way. So anyway, you'll see that coming about. It's available at Doc Holliday right now. It'll be available on October the 24th from Alcon. And those are the 2 sources that you can get that. And it will give you the 10% that I said can bump you from wherever you are, about 75 up to 85, across the board, because it'll improve the low powers the most, but it'll improve the high powers too. Okay. Now, so that's why it's called total surgically induced astigmatism, because it includes all of the factors that result in the final refraction with the spherical lens. Okay? All right. Now, one other thing I will point out to you is that when your lens is 30 degrees off, you'll have the same amount of residual astigmatism as you had preoperative astigmatism. 30 degrees is where it's 100%. All right? 100% at 30 degrees, 200% at 90 degrees, and it's about 141% when you're 45 degrees off. Okay, that works out to be about 3% per degree. So if you're 10 degrees off, you're going to have a 30% error. Okay, it's about 3% per degree. All right, now, again, the SIAs on our software, when you check that button, it automatically puts that in. And people say, well, whoa, wait a minute. What's this SIA axis and an incision at 180 degrees? Well, that's a right eye. The incision is at 180. But look at the axis, 91 degrees, almost against the rule. But that's the axis of flattening, okay? Now, the point is that people are not used to having the axis of the surgically induced axis not being the same as the incision. Because all of us have taught with arcuate incisions that you get flattening along the arcuate incision. Well, that doesn't work with cataract surgery because it's one-sided and there's 2 incisions anyway. All right? But the point is that that axis rarely agrees with where it puts the incision. Now, in about another month, I'm going to modify that to allow you to put the incision wherever you want. 90 degrees, 270, any place you want to put it, and it will calculate the surgically induced astigmatism for any incision. So you'll check that box, but that box, when you check it, will allow you to put in an incision wherever you want, And then that'll populate the magnitude and the axis for the total surgically induced astigmatism. Okay? And that's available for those that don't have the software at docholiday.com on that toric calculator. Okay, so you don't need my software to do that. You can go up the website and do it for free on that open calculator. That's why I show this, because this is not a course about our software, it's a course to make you do a better job. And then this is what you get. It shows you which to do. Okay, and this is perfect. 0.22 axis 90. That's with the rule. Okay? And what I'm saying is, if you refract your patient at 1 month, that's going to be a little with the rule, because he's going to drift about another quarter doctor by 6 months to 1 year. So that's great fun. All right. Now, post-op toric calculator. You're not always going to come out with a great refractive result. The lens may rotate, you didn't get it right, whatever it is, it comes out, and you have a refraction that's not what you wanted. Okay? Now, John Verdal and David Harden have a toric back calculator and astigmatism fixed, and it's a constant. In other words, they use 1.5 to 1 for the toricity of the IOL to corneal astigmatism, or in this case, to the refractive result. And it's because the calculation using toric is pretty tough. It took me 6 months to get that to work right. And we have it in the consultant and the back calculator, but I offered to help them, and they said, no, that's not going to do it. But anyway, now, the first thing you have to do is you have to measure the axis of the IOL. It's not the intended axis that I care about. I need to know the actual axis of the IOL, which means you need to measure that. Now, there are reticles that are available that have degrees on them like these, where you can put them in your eyepiece and you can measure that axis. You can take the slit lamp, project it on the lens. You see here, you're parallel to those 3 dots that mark the lens, and then you can look at what the axis that you've set that to on the keratometer, or I mean on your slit lamp, and those usually go in 5 degrees, and you can interpolate, because you need to be down to 1 degree, is what you need to get that down to 1 degree. And you see right there, that's in 5 degrees. So you basically look at that right there and see where that mark is, and you're looking at those to see what the number is, but that's where you do it. So as you put that beam on there, you just look at that little adjustment for what you've angled the slit beam, and that's the number that you use. You can also, if you level your foreopter, you can put that beam on the foreopter, and you see that comes out about, in this case, 58 degrees. So you can level your foreopter and project the beam on there, and you can look at what those axes are. But you need to be down to about 1 degree to get those right. All right? And this is what you get. Now, I actually can calculate it 2 ways. I can do it from a post-op set of Ks that are not very accurate, and I can do it from the observed IOL meridian, which is the one you want to look at. These 2 double-check as an example. But it says, okay, I need to rotate that 45 degrees clockwise. And that's what you do. It's not an absolute angle. It's an absolute angle in rotation. So you're not rotating it to 135 degrees, you are. But even if your registration is not exactly right with the real eye, you want to rotate that 45 degrees from where it is. So you know where it is. You put a little mark and you rotate that 45 degrees. And that's 1.5 clock hours in this case. Now your accuracy to do that is about 5 degrees, plus or minus 5 degrees. All right? So here's an example, real case. On a 6-diopter toric lens, it's very difficult to get that just right. So let's look at that. Here's the case. The patient's refraction came out, and that refraction was, let's back up here. That refraction post-operatively was plus 50 minus 150 and 80. Okay, in this left eye. All right. And what happens is it says if you rotate that lens, and look what happens. It says 14 degrees counterclockwise using the refraction. This is an actual case, and 10 degrees counterclockwise using the case. Now this is the one that's best. Always use the observed axis of the IOL. And when you do that, rotate it 14 degrees, then it says, good job. Now you got to rotate it 6 degrees. And the patient came out with a little. And the reason is, you can't do that better than about plus or minus 4 degrees. That's what all the studies show in terms of when you take pictures and stuff. You can't do that better than 4. So a 6 diopter toric lens, if you're 4 degrees off, 4 degrees times 3% is 12, and 12% of 6 diopters is 0.8 diopters, which means the tolerances is plus or minus 3/4 of a diopter. So you're going to have, now, with a Aura, a little better chance because as you're rotating that lens, it's doing, but you're still 3 or 4 degrees. So all I'm saying is, if you end up with less than a diopter of astigmatism with a 6 diopter toric, you've done a good job. And yet the patient's not going to have perfect vision. So it's better to fine tune that with a laser than it is to fine tune it with rotating the lens because your precision is better. All right. Now we've been through these, we've done enough of those. I don't want to spend any more time on toric lens cases. Well, there is one thing I would point out. If you do that back calculation, and it shows that when you rotate it to the ideal position, you have more than a diopter and a half residual astigmatism, then that's the wrong toric power. Okay? And you do know that that 1.5 to 1, if you're off by a diopter, then 1.5 diopters more toric power is what you need if the axis hadn't flipped. In other words, if your astigmatism's at 90 degrees and you come out and it says you're going to come out plus 1 at 90 degrees, you know that lens is too weak. If it comes out plus 1 against the rule, you know that's one lens step too strong. Okay? So you look at what the predicted residual refraction when you rotated it, and if it's at the same axis as the steep meridian, then it's weak, and if it's opposite, you flip the axis and it's too strong. Okay? But that calculation does all right. All right. Silicone in the vitreous. We have some more topics here that we'll talk about, and those are basically this. Okay, silicone in the vitreous. The only thing that counts there is whether you're going to remove that at the time of cataract surgery. If you're going to take the silicone out, then the calculation is the same as if they didn't have silicone. Okay? Now what people say, well, Dr. Holliday, what do I have to do on my biometry? It's true that when you take the biometric measurement to get the corrected axial length, you have to set that to pseudophakic eye with silicone, or your cataract eye with silicone. Okay? Because they'll have an adjustment in there to get that optical biometry correct. But once you have the correct axial length, which is what that adjustment does, then if they're going to take the vitreous out of surgery, then the calculation is just like a normal patient. You've corrected the axial length to get the right value, and now you're doing that calculation just as it was normal. Now here's where it's not the same. If they say, well, we don't plan to take that silicone out. Well, that's different. And that's when you check the box on the consultant program, silicone in the eye. And then when you have silicone in the eye, the lens power will be about 3 diopters more for a convex plano lens and 6 to 8 diopters more for a biconvex lens. So think about this for a second. Let's say it calculated a 20 diopter and you were going to use silicone. Okay, 20 diopter lens, and let's say it's equiconvex. 10 diopters on the front, 10 diopters on the back. When I put that 20 diopter lens in the eye, and I have silicone behind silicone, and I had 10 diopters on the back, what's the effective power of that lens going to be? 10. 10, because the silicone to silicone has no power. Same index of refraction, no power. So that's going to come out 10 diopters hyperopic. So that's an extreme example. You're going to use acrylic, and but it does come out 6 to 8 diopters more because of that index of refraction. And it also means that if they ever do take that silicone out, the patient's going to be myopic by 4 to 6 diopters. Okay? So you're going to have to do a lens exchange. So, but anyway, they can't get a lens that works for both silicone in the eye and silicone out of the eye. So you have to make that decision. And if it's imminent that they're going to take it out shortly after the surgery for whatever reason, then you run the calculation like the only time you run it with that checkbox is if they're never going to take the silicone out. Okay. Refractive formula. Okay? Now, that refractive formula we wrote a long time ago, AJO 1995. And the refractive formula just says it's like a contact. When you do a spectacle to contact vertex calculation, all you do is take the focal length of the glasses, subtract the vertex distance and calculate the new focal length, and then take the reciprocal, get the power. Well, with this formula, you're finding out and you're vertexing it through the cornea back to the IOL. So what you're saying is, I'm not going to remove any power from the eye. I just want to calculate what the power would be equivalent to the spectacle at the IOL point. Okay? It's also used for phakic IOLs. It's used for secondary piggybacks, and it's used for IOL exchange, because whatever power you calculate that to be, it's what needs to be added or subtracted to the current lens. And the only thing you have to do is if it's a secondary piggyback, you select sulcus for the calculation. And if it's an IOL exchange, you select bag, because you want to know the power to add to the existing lens, so it's bag for an exchange and sulcus for a piggyback. That's the only thing you do different. Now, that formula is right here. Okay, that's the one we published, whatever that is, 29, 24 years ago. And that's it. And you just see all it's really doing is it's saying, here's the pre-RX vertex to the cornea to the ELP, and here's the posterior vertex back to the cornea to the ELP, and the difference in those two is what the IOL has to be. That's all that is. That's the pre-op vertex to the corneal plane, and that's the post-op to the corneal plane, and the difference has to be the IOL. That's all that is. So, that's what you calculate, but it's not 1-to-1 for a minus lens and 1.5-to-1 for a plus lens. It comes out whatever it comes out. Okay. So, all of these are valuable. Let's look at for refractive surgery. So most of the time, when I do those for doctors, most of them are comfortable doing a lens exchange, as opposed to a secondary piggyback. Now, the trade-off there is a mislabeled lens. Because if that lens is not what you said it was, and you calculate the exchange power and it says -5, and you take 5 diopters what you thought that lens was, and it was mislabeled, now you're going to have a surprise the next day that's equal and opposite when you put the right power. So that's the only thing about exchange is it assumes that the lens power that you have in there is right. And I can tell you that today that's pretty much the case. But last week I had a guy that had the wrong toric power. Said it was a 3 1/4, and it was actually a 2 1/4. couldn't afford to say it was a 3, but it was off. They had 1 step size off in the lens, and I showed them how to measure that in the eye. But anyway, you're pretty safe today depending upon the power, okay? And that it's what you thought it was when you put it in the eye. But that's the only risk, is that it assumes that the lens that you have in the eye is what you thought it was. Okay, piggybacks, exchange, talk about that. Refraction formula, we've got all that. And there's the formula again, over refraction. Now, that is one more thing. If you made a mistake that's up around, basically over 5 or 6, you're better doing that with a soft lens and using a vertex of 0 rather than doing a -6, -8 with a set of spectacles that assume that the vertex distance is 12 millimeters. Because you can make a half and you want to be on the button. So I'm just saying that if you have somebody that came out -8, well, in the refraction, get a soft lens that's going to be closer and have a show more power, and you put that in and you change the vertex to 0. But it's just the same way with taking IOLs. When you get people that are over 6, 7, or 8, you're better off using a soft contact lens and putting a vertex of 0 in, because that's exact. Because your vertex distance for a refraction is never exact, and when you get over 6 to 8 diopters, that starts to make a mistake. Okay. We got that, and that's it. So we've got about 15 minutes.
Any method, any way to know exactly the IOL power is exact or not?
Well, yeah, I do have a method that, that's how we did it. No, and here's a little trick that you can use that works real well, okay? You've got somebody that's got a refractive surprise, and you're trying to figure out whether that lens is the right power, okay? One way you can do that is to take a lens out of the pack that has the same power that's labeled in the eye, and then at the slit lamp, hold that right next to that. And for a spherical lens, it's pretty easy. What you'll see when you put the slit beam coaxial, you'll see the 3rd Vergence image of the mirror on the slit lamp. And what you'll see is you'll see a reflection of that mirror. If you have a hog strut, it looks like an inverted Atari symbol. Looks like this as the mirror gets wider and comes down. If you have a Zeiss, it just looks rectangular. But you'll see a reflection of that mirror in the cornea, all right? And you'll also see a reflection of the mirror on the slit lamp from the 3rd Vergence image of the front of the cornea, or from the front of the lens. So when you hold that lens up next to the eye, the size of that mirror will be the same. It'll be about 10% larger on the one in the eye than the one outside of the eye. But if the power's off, it'll be a whole lot more than 10% different, okay? So you can compare it. Now, at surgery, when you're doing the exchange, it's even easier. Because after you get that lens out, if you haven't cut it too much, you can put that side by side and see exactly if those Vergence images from the microscope, you put it on the cornea, and you put those two, or you put it someplace where you can look at the microscope. After you've taken that out of the eye, you don't even need to be over the eye. And you put those two on a table, and you see if the Vergence images are the same. And if they are, then that is the right lens power. And if they're different, you don't care what the power is. You're not trying to figure out that. You're just trying to see if that was accurate. And if they're different, then that lens is wrong. That's how you tell. So it's better to do it at the slit lamp, because at the slit lamp, once you've done that and you've proven that it's wrong, you do a secondary piggyback. Because the secondary piggyback doesn't care what that lens in the eye is. you're gonna put a secondary piggyback in the sulcus that will correct whatever the refractive error is, and you don't care with that lens in the eye. Okay, so that's always the safest. So by doing that check ahead of time, there are ways, and I've read an article on how you can calculate the power, but I've never found anybody else that could do it. It's difficult. So once you find out it's mislabeled, then you go to the secondary piggyback and you go on your way. That's the easiest way. Or you go to LASIK for PRK. Yes, sir?
So, back to the multifocals and angle kappa.
Yeah.
So if you have a 5 horizontal and 2 vertical, that'll be less than 6. 4
Well,
and
let's
3 will
see.
be less than 6.
Okay, you got to calculate.
I did them. So that's,
What did it come up?
well, it's 25 for 5, and 2 is 4, so it's the
25 and 5, and that's 65. Well, wait a minute. If it's, how much was it? 0.5 or what? 0.2?
5 and 2, which is more than 6
Okay,
actually.
0.5, right. 0.5 is 25, and 0.2 is 0.4.
It's
So when you add those
5.3.
together, it comes out
5.38.
Right, 5.38.
So you,
So 5.38, okay, which is less than that 0.6,
good.
is equivalent to somebody that has 0 and 0.538,
Yeah.
and that would be okay.
Yeah.
Now, all I'm, and I would say one more thing.
And 6 and 0 would work, but 6 and 1 would be over.
Well, and what I'm saying, that is an accurate comparison,
Okay.
yes. Because if it was horizontally 0.55, it's equivalent to that.
Yeah.
Now, what happens is this, everything is a continuum. And that data that we come from is Argowal's article and the Czechoslovakian article, which had a regression line, and it showed a significant complaints of poor quality vision at the level of about 0.6 on the regression line. But there were some patients that were down and less than that that complained, and some patients that higher that didn't complain. So that's just kind of a rule of thumb.
Right.
So like refractive surgery, like diffractive optics and everything else, you have to size the patient up. And if the patient is a forgiving, tolerant, wonderful person, then that 0.58 wouldn't bother me. But at the same time you're making the choice, someone with an angle kappa, a core view of 0, who's going to have better performance, would lean me to allowing somebody that's an engineer that's kind of critical of doing a diffractive lens than I would the person that's forgiving that's up near 0.6. So that's just
So
another.
it's more than just a break point, it's a
Yes.
continuum.
It's it's another
Risk factor.
risk factor
Yeah.
that you work into your decision for that specific
Right.
patient.
Right. But over 6, you would say.
But over
red light.
6, the risk of that is very high
Yeah.
because most of those patients complain that they don't.
Correct.
All right, any other questions? Then please fill out your form or whatever that thing is in the academy to get that. I'll hang around for 15 minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank
for
you.
coming.